Hello, this is Chris Bennett. Join us weekly on TV on the Burning Shiva Hour as we explore the roots of cannabis culture throughout history and around the globe. Hi, this is Chris Bennett with the Burning Shiva Hour, and today on Pot TV we're honored to have a special guest, Professor of Classical Mythology at Boston University, Carl P. Ruck. Hi, Carl. How are you doing today?
Hi, Chris.
Yeah, Professor Ruck, you've had the opportunity to work with a number of well-known, prominent individuals in the entheogenic research field. Could you tell us a little bit about how you got involved with this, who you've had a chance to work with, and a bit of a background?
Well, I worked with Gordon Wasson, and through him I met Albert Hoffman and Richard Schultes.
Oh, wow.
And so all the big ones I know. And actually, although a team of us signed up for the term entheogen, I was the one, together with Blaise Staples, who's also a classicist, who came up with it. And so it's really our term, and we're very proud to find that people are using it. I began by being a typical classical scholar, but I felt that the sources of inspiration were not rational but irrational, and so I thought a good deal of the literature that I was studying didn't have a rational meaning, but had a kind of metaphysical, intuitive meaning. And I was particularly interested in the theater of Dionysus, and I know that people have put rational meanings on the plays, but if you look at the situation of the performance of the plays, where you had so many plays produced one after another in a festival, and the plays would not have an individual meaning; they'd have to have a thematic meaning. And so, as an attempt to follow that idea, I started studying more about the religion of Dionysus and discovered that Greek wine, which was always drunk diluted, highly diluted, but was very, very intoxicating, could not have been a simple alcoholic beverage, but was a mixture of alcohol with other things. So that got me interested in drugs, or as we now call it, entheogens. And I discovered, in addition, that during the performances of the drama, the people in the theater were drinking this potion, and it was a particular potion, had a name because of the things that were added to it. So the whole situation indicated that it was a kind of joint shamanic communion, rather than the kind of thing that rational scholars have imposed upon it. So I had written something of that about that, and Blaise, my friend, suggested that I contact Gordon Wasson, because he was such a great name. I was very reluctant, but I did. And almost immediately he phoned me, said he was coming to Cambridge, and could we have lunch? And so we got to know each other very, very well.
How long ago was that?
Well, Gordon's been dead for 10 years. We published The Road to Lepsis in 78. I think it must have been about 73 that I first met him.
Wow, that's quite a ways back.
Yeah.
Now, what kind of substances are you suggesting for the Dionysiac wine? What do you think that they were using in it?
Well, I think they would use anything they could find. It still is the custom in country brews to add whatever you can to doctor the wine. And in the situation of the Greek drinking party, it was very much more like Japanese geisha party. I don't know if you know the custom is there, but your host challenges you with intoxication, and so you know that you're up for it. You prepare by eating special things in advance, because you don't have the choice of not drinking or drinking abstemiously. You have to drink as much as is given, and you drink it down, and then, as in the Greek symposium, you're not supposed to show any sign of drunkenness, and so you play complicated word games and things of that kind. And the master of the drinking party for the symposium chose what he was going to add. And anything, I think, was fair game. I know that you're particularly interested in marijuana, and that certainly figured in Roman antiquity.
Yeah, they found Thracian wine with cannabis in it.
Seem to be so uninterested in it, but Herodotus' description of the Scythian steam bath, as he called it, seems to indicate that they weren't that interested in it, which would mean that they had other things that were equally good. And the same thing is true. The Greeks were aware of beer, but they only had an anthropological interest in beer. Their drink was wine. But anything that was available, they would add to it.
Well, it's kind of like the strong drink in the Bible there.
That's the so-called strong drink. Yeah, there is no such thing as strong alcoholic drink without distillation. And the ancients did not know about distillation. They didn't even know what alcohol was as a substance. And so the strong alcoholic drink is strong because of the things that are added to it.
Do you see a similar substance at use in the Eleusis mysteries, or?
See, we often can fantasize that in antiquity anything went, and that drugs were not illegal. But in the case of the Eleusinian mystery, quite clearly there was a drug involved, and the profane use of it was very illegal. You could be put to death for it. And the work I did with Wasson and Hoffman, we identified that the toxin came from ergot. It has to be separated from the other toxins in ergotized grain. But our original solution was that only the psychoactive toxins are water-soluble, because if you don't separate them, you suffer from the effects of ergotism, which can be fatal. But the psychotropic ones are water-soluble. That was our original theory, and people have tried the potion. And Jonathan Ott tried it over and over again, and it doesn't seem to work, even though the chemistry is correct. You can't access psychoactive toxins. But we're very naive in our understanding of how complex and knowledgeable ancient herbalism would be. And so we've refined the idea, paper with Daniel Perrine and Peter Webster. If you have a alkaline solution, the water-soluble toxins, which are the psychoactive ones, are more soluble. So that's been proposed. But even so, we may still be too naive. For example, in the death of Socrates, he's given a drink of hemlock, and the descriptions that in contemporary literature that I found of death by hemlock are absolutely horrible. Your stomach bloats up and you explode. And yet, in the death of Socrates, as described by Plato, it's a very, very slow cooling of the extremities, rising up until it hits the heart. But as he's taking the potion, Socrates says, "Is it all right if I pour out a bit as a libation to the gods?" And the attendant says, "No, this is the right potion, the right amount. You have to drink the whole thing." So it does seem to indicate that they knew how to control and modify the effects by addition of various other substances.
Until the Dark Ages came along and wiped out all that knowledge.
Wiped out all that knowledge, right.
Yeah. Now, I guess, what's your feeling? Is the role, the history of religion and the role of entheogens pretty inseparable? Like, you see that in pretty much every major religion, a role for some sort of entheogenic substance?
Yeah, we're not probably the first ones to propose it, but the last book that I wrote with Wasson, Persephone's Quest,
I read that,
Entheogens and the Origins of Religion, we're making a strong statement there that the entheogenic experience is, in fact, the origin of religious experience. And other people have proposed it and are now going along with that idea also. But I don't think we were the first to say that.
And being from the West in a culture deeply influenced by the Bible, and the Bible generally thought to be the pious book of sobriety, what role do you see for entheogens in the whole biblical storyline from the Garden of Eden to the book of Revelation?
Well, as you know, I've been reading your book, and I'm greatly impressed by it. And you've totally convinced me that cannabis had a role in the Jewish temple.
Well, that's an honor to
early Judaism, and probably passed on into Christianity. I've also written other things along. It's interesting how your work has been paralleling mine, although I only got to know your book about a month or so ago when you sent me the copy of it. But we are essentially in agreement about everything, except that I doubt that cannabis is strong enough to produce the visionary experience of an intense mystery initiation. I think other things were involved. We've been working recently on Mithraism, and 7 stages of graded initiation for the final revelation. And I'm quite sure that probably the chamber was always fumigated with incense, and that cannabis was part of it, and so that the whole experience was colored by that heightened state of mind. But probably, in order to produce the ultimate revelation, you needed some other entheogen.
Yeah, I agree with you mostly with what you're saying, but I believe there's some ingestible forms of cannabis that are quite powerful entheogenic substances, and there's different records of this. Andrew Weil has a description of a cannabis overdose that's very, very. He's like reliving stuff from when he was a kid, and said it seemed like he was right there.
It can be very intense. I know.
But I also agree that, like particularly in the Mithraic, which is very similar to the Gnostic 7-stage initiations, that it does seem that a number of such substances were used, and cannabis was one of them, much like Maztec shamans start with Salvia divinorum and then move on to the mushrooms, that different substances were associated with the different planetary spheres and ascension through them in both Mithraic and in Gnostic documents.
Yes, I agree.
And it's definitely, what do you think the end goal, like what was the experience they were looking at? Do you think it was a collective experience, not necessarily shared collectively, but a collectively identifiable psychic state perhaps, or something?
Yes, it was to experience the event of death and rebirth before you die, so that when it happens, it's a familiar experience.
And you're prepared to just pass on to that next level. That's fascinating. And your feelings on the soma, I know that was a big theory of Wasson's. Do you identify that solely with the fly agaric, or like the Greek wines, perhaps a combination of different substances?
Well, I've been very much influenced by Gordon's work and trying to follow where it goes. And I think very often you have the symbolism of the fly agaric, that other substances are being used. Most recently, we've been in, because fly agaric is difficult to find, and in some ways, for some people at least, a very unpleasant experience. Not totally dependable. And we've been looking at how the fly agaric symbolism got transferred probably to an ergot drink, which became probably the ingredient of beer. Do you know Tom Riedlinger's paper on Egyptian beer?
No, I haven't read that.
Well, Egyptian beer was made in a very strange process. Instead of just fermenting the grain, it was made from fermented grain and from bread that was soaked in water. And he argues that ergotized bread made from ergotized grain, if you soak it, you would get the psychoactive toxin from it. And if you add that to the alcoholic ferment, you see, you can't use ergotized grain for fermentation, because the toxic chemicals are soluble in alcohol, not in water. And so it's very strange. The archaeologists say, well, it was apparently a very inefficient and weak kind of beer. Yet strangely, it was very intoxicating, and they used it for ritual intoxication. I mean, they don't know what they're saying. It obviously had its intoxicating quality, not primarily from the alcohol, but from some other source. And Riedlinger's idea is that it comes from the soluble toxins in the ergot. Otherwise, why would they make it that way? And this is particularly interesting. One of the things we've been working on, King Midas with the golden touch, even though he's a legendary figure, he really existed, and his funeral remains have been dug up by archaeologists. And for his funeral, they had a funeral banquet, and for some reason, we know why, because it was a sacred banquet, the utensils for the banquet were buried with the king, and there's a residue of what they drank. Now, everyone, we think that the funeral banquet was, King Midas, in his mythical tradition, is very much involved with journeys to the Hyperboreans, which means out-of-body experience, traveling as a shaman, things of that kind.
Wasn't Hyperborean a term for like shamans from the Scythian culture?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And we think that the funeral guests all took a journey in the soul with the king to his final resting place, and so that the drink was psychoactive. The archaeologists have analyzed the residue and discovered that it was a barley drink with honey, but since they're not aware of or interested in possible entheogenic additives, they've done no testing for ergot. We've been trying to get access to the residue to test more sophisticatedly for that sort of thing. But it's strange. You almost get people interested, and then they shy away from it because the attitude of our country towards drugs is so adverse that you might lose your academic respectability if you discovered that King Midas had an ergot drink for his funeral.
It's like the study of sex in religion a century ago.
I suspect that European culture finds often, even though there's this awe for the fly agaric, Amanita muscaria, that they find the eating of mushrooms somehow strange, but they would find nothing wrong with the drinking of a special beer. And I think the tradition passed down into Europe primarily as fortified beers. And beer is the same situation as wine. There's no reason why they wouldn't add anything to it to make it stronger.
Well, then, how about in places like Ireland? And then I know that Peter Lamborn Wilson is speculating on an Irish soma. Do you see the Irish soma as something along this type of line as well, or?
Well, I think probably both were going on because the symbolic characteristics of the fly agaric are so strongly embedded in the folkloric tradition. But I think it's quite possible that, the point of it was to have the experience, and anything that was going to do it most feasibly would be used.
And
I know that you've been interested in Freemasonry and things of that kind.
Yeah.
And in alchemy as well. And I suspect that Freemasons would have shied away from eating fly agaric, but we know that they were reviving the Egyptian mysteries. What do they mean by that?
Yeah, exactly. Well, something I've been reading on both positive and negative sites about the Illuminati was that their original slogan was "Uaj Blumenkraft," the eternal flower power. And both sites state that illumination was produced by a combination of meditation and hashish intoxication. Now, unfortunately, it's pretty hard to document something like that, but we do know that one of the original founders of the Illuminati, Jan Potocki, wrote the Saragossa manuscript, which is stories within stories, much like 1001 Nights, but the main character is stoned on hashish, and you can't tell if what's happening is really happening or if it's a product of hashish intoxication. These complicated alchemical manuscripts, which in some senses seem to describe actual chemical processes, and which in other instances seem to describe processes inside the individual. Do you see these as actual potential references to chemical preparations of entheogens or extractions and or anything like that?
Yes, probably. But I think that the medieval Renaissance mind acted quite differently from ours. And so that by manipulating things in the test tube, they were also manipulating spiritual processes within themselves. So I don't think it was all just a matter chemistry and trying to find the drink that was going to produce the experience. I think the easiest way to understand the difference is that we would tend to say, I ate something and saw God, and the early Christian mystics say, I saw God and he gave me something to eat.
That's an interesting parallel. Prior to alchemy, too, I'm just going to step back here a little bit between religions. At the fall of Christianity, well, not like the fall of Christianity, but at the rise of the Dark Ages, the rise of the Roman Catholic Church, do you see that as an instance that was very much focused on the suppression of entheogenic knowledge?
Yes, because the whole emphasis of the Roman Catholic Church, was that it had to control access to God. And this is still the prejudice of the Church. Even though the Christian mystics were doing it individually, you're not supposed to contact God except through the Church. And so it's a political structure that they've imposed between the devotee and the deity.
What entheogenic roles do you think that the early Christians were using? What substances do you think that they may have been using for the first few centuries prior to the Dark Ages?
Well, we've always been interested in the mushrooms. And in Apples of Apollo, following Fabro, I guess his name is, who published it in the journal Eleusis, there's a basilica in northern Italy, 4th century, so it's very early Christian. And it's built on top of an earlier Christian sanctuary. I mean, the original one was 4th century. And when they built the new church on top of it, they just left the floor of the old church underneath it. And archaeologists have uncovered that it was a mosaic floor. And the design of the floor has baskets of mushrooms, probably Amanita muscaria. Now, this was not a restaurant. This was an agape hall, an early Christian meeting place.
Love feast.
And so you're not decorating it with the favorite food of the Romans. You're decorating it with the sacrament.
Fascinating. Now, do you see certain early Christian sects using these substances and certain ones not using them? Anything like that? Like the Gnostic sects and the Catholic sects, maybe not? Or do you think that the Catholics were aware of it and they suppressed it?
I think that the Roman Church was aware of it and suppressed it, but that it continually was reintroduced by contact with the East, especially under the Crusaders, and that they never stamped it out, especially since the sacrament of early Christianity was probably very similar to the sacrament of Mithraism, and Mithraism was supposedly eradicated when Constantine converted to Christianity, but it never stopped. And one of the essays in the next issue of Entheos, written by a Spanish colleague, Jose Alfredo Gonzalez Celdran, they have very long names, and you have to use them all, but it's a postscript to the main essay on Mithras, and he uncovered in 10th century Avila, where St. Teresa came from, that on the cathedral over the portal, in a very significant context of the earthly banquet and the heavenly banquet, Lazarus, but not the one who's resurrected from the dead, but the other one who's denied anything to eat at the rich man's banquet. And then when after they die, Lazarus is in heaven and the rich man's in hell. So it has very much to do with the sacred banquet. And right in the middle between the two panels over the portal is something that can only be a mushroom and probably a fly agaric. I mean, he asked the priest, what is that up there? He said, it's a mushroom, but I don't know what it's doing there.
Fascinating.
And the reason this is a postscript to Mithras is that in the church is laid to rest a bishop, and the symbolism of his tomb is Mithraic, and showing him being born from the pine cone rock, the way Mithras is supposed to have been born or regenerated.
One of the more popular Gnostic teachers, Mani, was also a worshiper of Zoroaster along with Jesus and Buddha. I would imagine that some Mithraic influence must have come into Christianity through Mani. And
oh yes,
yeah.
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, the Manichaeans were accused of eating the red mushroom too.
Yes, they loved mushrooms.
Yeah.
And it has to do with the whole ethnobotany of Manichaean religion, which is that the spirit is encased in matter, and you try to liberate the spirit from this curse of being encased in matter. Unfortunately, you have to eat things, and when animals and plants were created, special circumstance in the creation of plants is that they have less spirit in them, and so they were vegetarians. And amongst the vegetables, the plant that had the least spirit encased in it, because they couldn't figure out how to reproduce, was the mushroom. So the mushroom diet was the best vegetarian diet to release the body from its imprisonment, and the soul from its imprisonment in the body.
Now, the Catholic Church seemed extremely worried about the infiltration of their numbers by Manichaeans. Do you see these frescoes and whatnot that depict the fly-agaric, or potentially depict the fly-agaric, as possible Manichaean initiates infiltrating the church and managing to leave us little hieroglyphs of their own views?
Yeah, probably. But I don't think they were trying to leave us a sign. I think that it has to do with this basic controversy. Can the church stand in the way of your direct contact with God? Do you have to contact God through the church, or can you contact God individually? And the desire to have this mystical union with the divine personally is so strong that people are going to break the bonds all the time.
The church was never, well, maybe eventually fully successful, but weren't so successful in completely silencing the Manichaeans, and they went into China and into Europe through the Cathars and stuff.
Yes, they were still in China in the 17th century.
Wow, I've heard that Mantak Chia's whole sexual tantric type knowledge comes from Manichaean sources. And do you see references to entheogenic use continuing in China and continuing in southern France and Europe amongst the Albigenese, Cathar type?
Yes, quite definitely.
Fascinating. And as far as secret societies that have used these substances, I don't know if you've heard about Shakespeare's pipes. I had the opportunity.
Yes, I know. That's what we were hoping to replicate in investigating the residue of King Midas'
funeral.
It
reminded me of that.
But we haven't managed to get access yet.
Yeah, it's difficult. That's the hard part. You know, as I was saying earlier, it's almost like trying to study the role of sex in religion a century ago. It's like, oh, we can't talk about that. And since it never gets talked about, it's never really taken serious.
It's called destructive testing. In order to test for what's in it, you are going to destroy the sample. And since it is a piece of human history, it's very hard to convince people that you can destroy it in order to discover something. Although you only need a little bit, and it really is a prejudice against discovering that sort of thing.
The whole use of the entheogens in the medieval times, do you think this was something that was done, like it had to be done to hide from the church in a sense, that they couldn't really be very open about what they were doing?
Yes.
Do you see any sort of tradition from that time period carrying on to the modern day?
Well, how do you mean? I've
via like Freemasons or Rosicrucians or something like that, I suppose.
We've, Dan DeCour wrote the Mana, psychedelic sacrament of the Bible, and we've discussed just how far you can trace these entheogenic initiations, and he feels he can go as far as the 19th century. Probably further, but he's afraid to. And I had an informant in Greece who was very excited about what I was doing, high placed in the government. and he wanted to tell me things, but then he got frightened, and so he's broken off all communication with me.
Fascinating. I've heard R. Gordon Wasson was a Freemason. Do you know anything about that?
He never mentioned it to me. I spoke to Mark Hoffman, who's gone through the Wasson archives, and there's nothing in it that he knows that mentions it. But it would be totally the sort of thing he would do if for no other reason than for business purposes. I mean, it would be the sort of thing a man of his background could have done. But he never mentioned it. But of course, he would have been sworn to secrecy.
Yeah,
He wouldn't.
Yeah, Aleister Crowley, one guy I've looked at for like entheogenic references, mentions in Psychology of Hashish and elsewhere that he can only say so much because of his association with these associations.
Yes.
So that kind of
Gordon
limits
used to say he had taken drugs, but only in countries where it was legal.
There you go. Yeah, well, for me, it's kind of the opposite of Merker, whereas like I've been chasing it back and I can kind of find it to the 19th century, but trying to attach a tradition from the 19th century to a further older medieval tradition. There was just so many Freemason groups and Neo-Freemason and Neo-Rosicrucian groups that arose during that period. It's hard to tell exactly where one starts, you know, and whether it's continuing on from something older.
Sure.
Now, as far as like with America being near the boiling point on the war on drugs and stuff like that, what role do you see in the future for scholars such as yourself that study these substances and indeed for the entheogens themselves?
Well, I think that there's sort of a benign neglect for us. We can say what we want and it doesn't influence anyone. I think the real change is happening with Europe's attitude. Europe has been forced into America's war on drugs, and it's so obvious that it's a war that can't be won. So Europe is disassociating itself with America. I mean, England just recently decriminalized marijuana. And I know someone who's working with the European Parliament. All of Europe may well follow that lead.
Fascinating. Yeah, there's lots of movement that way here in Canada as well, and hopefully being so close to America, we can lend a little bit of a nudge to the mouse can push the elephant a little bit, and we can sway it the other way.
I mean, drugs are dangerous, but the real danger is to prohibit, and the way to handle it is to the way alcohol is handled. It's given a positive meaning. It can be very dangerous. It can be addictive, but it also can have a social role, and you use the experience instead of prohibiting it.
On that note, if you were to see like some sort of spiritual-based reintroduction of substances into society, would you model it after any certain group that you've had a chance to study?
Well, it already is happening. I mean, for 100 years there's been a Brazilian cult with branches all over the United States. The Santo Daime used an ayahuasca sacrament, and the government hasn't managed to ban that. And the Native American Church has a peyote sacrament. The problem is that the government doesn't feel that you can convert to the Native American Church because it's an ethnic church. But that argument doesn't hold any water because you can convert to Judaism, which is definitely an ethnic religion. And so it's simply a matter of trying to keep people from having access to the experience.
Why do you think that is?
Well, it goes back to the early Roman Church. They want to control you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's been a great pleasure and honor to speak to you, Professor Ruck, and hopefully...
Hey, Chris, nice talking to you.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have a chance to discuss some things again.
You don't have the sense God gave a donut, do you?